Welcome back to Undulations. This is my second video about the core Volca NuBass. Since the first video, I've been delving into it and exploring the different sounds that you can get, and I'm quite happy with it. One thing in particular that I've enjoyed is sending the NuBass through a reverb and delay pedal, like you saw at the beginning of the video. So just want to say up front that if you've got access to guitar pedal or maybe a synth with an audio pathway or possibly even your DAW, it's a great way to extend and enhance the types of things you can do with the NuBass. Now in this video I'll be focusing on using the sequencer and motion sequencing, which are quite powerful on the NuBass, and I'm going to talk about some fundamental things like what gets stored in a memory slot and what doesn't, and the per step parameters, accent, transpose, and slide. Those are a really rich way to control your sequences, and you can also use clear as a sort of undo, redo feature. That's very good for performance, and also the active step settings as well. So it's a lot to go through, and then I want to just make a sequence that's entirely from motion sequencing, and you'll see what I mean by that when I do it. So we'll make the sequence and then we'll modify it, copy it, and chain some together, and this will be a way to show you how you can make longer sequences on the NuBass. And then there are a few more things that I want to show you guys. First one is using the motion sequencing as a way to capture additional parameters and store them in a memory slot. That can be quite handy. And second thing is using a empty sequence with motion sequencing. Kind of turns into sort of a meta LFO, a way to vary parameters over time. It's very interesting, a lot of different sounds that you can get out of the NuBass that way. Then third thing is using the step jump feature as a way to make kind of a do-it-yourself arpeggiator, and I like that a lot too. So let's dive in. So the Volca NuBass is quite similar to other Volcas, where there are 16 memory slots that you save to and load from. Now, I think it's worth going into sort of what gets carried along with the save and what is left behind. Now, to start with, the most important thing, your sequences that you make. So these sequences are going to be made either by step recording or live recording. Those get saved. And then any motion sequencing that you do, so you have to turn that on, hit record, and then when you change a parameter during a sequence, the motion sequencing gets saved in the memory slot. And then also the additional parameters of a sequence, so transpose, accent, and slide, those get saved. And then the last thing that gets saved is whether you have motion sequencing on or off. That gets saved as well. And that makes sense because it would be bad to have motion sequencing data, but then when you load the sequence, it doesn't turn motion sequencing on. So that's what is saved. As far as what isn't saved, basically any parameters on the knobs that you have not done motion sequencing for, those are just whatever they are set on the synth at the time. So those are not carried along. And then the other things that are not carried along are these 7 settings down here. These are sort of toggles or flags that you reach by doing shift, pressing the note. And so that's the VCO wave, or VTO wave in this case, the LFO wave, several LFO targets, LFO sync, and sustain. So you might have a patch that has those set in a particular way, but they are not carried along with your memory recall. And they're stored in a sense where that when you turn the Volca off, these settings remain the same when it turns back on, but they're not kept with any individual memory slot. And so to be clear, if you want to be able to accurately reproduce the sound that you've been getting out of the Volca NuBass, you're going to have to document the different settings for the knobs and pay careful attention to these two knobs where there's a shift functionality. So you can't just go by where it's set. You have to sort of set it and document that. I'm talking about for the shifted thing, so that would be the LFO rate and the LFO intensity. Then you also need to keep track of what the settings are for your 7 toggles down here. Alright, so now I've got kind of a neutral setting with the pitch zeroed, some saturation, some level on the sub-oscillator. Filters set in a kind of a neutral way. It sounds like this. A little bit of the envelope intensity, a little bit of decay, and some drive, and the tone set in the middle. Then what I'm going to do, instead of trying to enter in a step sequence or live record one, I'm just going to hit the step mode button, and I'm going to fill that out and put in the default note. And that's going to be adequate for what we're trying to do right now. So I'm going to come out of step mode, hit play, and that sounds like this. So it's just hammering on note 8 there. And then what we'll do, let's start with the accents. I want to show you how that goes. I'm going to put on 4 accents there, and then there's a special feature on the NuBass, which is that if you hold down a key while you're in accent mode, it'll start flashing. And so you can think of this as sort of a low accent, and then the blinking is going to be a higher accent. Now that's a little bit irritating to listen to, so let's use one of the fine features of the NuBass, which is where we can just put down random accents. So if you see what that did, I've got a couple of flashing ones, 3 of them. I've got a handful of the lower ones also. And so this is already giving us a way to change the sequence that we're dealing with. Okay, and so now that we've got that, it's easy to kind of go over to the transpose, and you'll see that it's basically the same thing. I could enter things in by hand, either short hold or long hold, but I'm just going to hit random and see what we get. Try again. Alright, they're a little bit thinner with the transpose. Alright, and then now I'm going to do the slides. I'll try random on that. I'm going to put a few more in. And a slide can be a little bit confusing, but all it really does is it just says don't trigger the next note. Alright, so the envelope isn't triggered and the LFO is not, the retrigger on the LFO is not fired off either. And then the pitch is gradually reached. And on the slide, the sort of the low setting is a fast slide, and then on the for the blinking, it's a slower slide. And then I should go back and clarify that on transpose, the non-blinking is a single octave up, and the flashing is 2 octaves up. We can add a little bit of swing to this. Put some reverb on that. Okay, so I feel like that's pretty cool sounds for basically no effort and not really doing any melody or anything like that. Okay, let's do some motion sequencing now. It's a lot of fun on the NuBass. I want to make a little correction to the manual, which is that It says that you can motion sequence the clear knobs on the synth. Not quite true. These two, the cutoff and the peak, they're not clear. You can certainly motion sequence them. This one over here is clear, and you can't motion sequence it. So what's the real breakdown? These four knobs over here cannot be motion sequenced, and so that's the tone and the drive, and then the tempo swing knob and the volume. Everything else you can do, and it's very handy. So to start with, let's do the same thing that we did before. Go into step mode and just throw down the default note like that. Not very interesting, but at this point what we're going to do is turn on motion sequencing. So there's the flag for that, and then we're going to hit record. And what I'm going to do, and this is a nice thing about this NuBass, is that you can use this pitch knob to put in sort of a melodic variation. So I'm going to wait for it to come around and then just start moving the knob. Not happy with that, so I'm going to try and get something a little bit better. Try one more time. Okay, I like that. So you can see it is flashing blue over here. Now, got that. I think now we want to think about trying to change the cutoff some. I'm going to turn the peak up a little bit. Alright, so then we hit record, and so now we got the cutoff going on that. Then we're going to start adding in some transposes and some accents. And then some slides. I'm going to back the accent off a little bit. Okay, and so this is just an easy way to get something going. And what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to stop and I'm going to save that. So function, memory, slot 1. Then I'm also going to save it to slot 2. So that moves us over to slot 2. Now, what am I going to do? I'm going to play and hit record again, and I'm going to do a different motion sequence on the cutoff. Try again. I'm going to turn it up. And I think I'm going to change the melodic sweep a little bit too. Okay, I like that. And then I'm going to hit save on that. And let me also randomize a little bit of the transposes, accents, and slots. Like that. Save it. And then let's do that one more time where we save as. Now we're in slot 3. progression go in there, and then we'll change the transpose. Okay, so then I'm going to save that one, and then now what I'm going to do is call up all three of them at the same time. Let me just do it like that. Okay, so you can see them flashing, and then now we've got a chained set of sequences, so this will be three of them. I'm going to add a little bit of reverb to that. Okay, so I think that turned out pretty cool. And so just to reiterate sort of the essentials of the NuBass sequencer, you can enter sequences step by step, you can live record them, and you can also sort of use motion sequencing to get a melodic groove going. It's a lot of different choices, and now we're at the point where there are a few things extra that I wanted to talk about. The first of these is that, okay, I've got queued up a sequence here that sounds like this. Now, that is a sequence that I live recorded and some motion sequencing on the cutoff, and I just want to call your attention to the decay, that the sort of sound that you get depends a lot on where that's set. Very short decay. And that's the sort of thing that makes a difference. And the technique that I've applied on the Volca kick before works here, which is that if you want to keep a knob at a particular value, you can just go ahead and motion record it. So record the motion sequence, and it doesn't really have to change. So let's say that I want to have something like that. All I've got to do is hit record and sort of wiggle the knob slightly, just enough to engage the motion sequencing. Okay, and so what that means is that now if I save this in slot 4, I can call something else, say slot 6, hit that, and I can change the decay setting, and then if I come back to memory 4, hit play, it should sound the same. And it's all because this has been sort of locked in on a particular parameter. Okay, so now I want to show something that I really like to do. I first started doing this on the Volca kick, but it works equally well on the NuBass, and that is using an empty sequence to motion sequence notes that you play on the keyboard. So we're going to be playing rather than using a sequence. So this is the sort of thing that you might like to have a MIDI keyboard to actually play on. So to start with, all I'm going to do is just give us something to be able to hear. And so that's the default note. I'm going to hit play for that. Well, let me turn on motion sequencing first. Now hit play. And then what I want to do is move the cutoff. Okay, so that's nice. And I'm going to hit stop there. And what I'm going to do now is just play a note. You'll hear it. But then now I'm going to play it after I've removed these steps and hit the play button. Add a little reverb to that. Okay, so that's cool, but then what I'm going to do is now stop that, and I'm going to write it to 5, and then I'm going to also write it to 6, so copying it basically. And what I want to do over here, I'm going to do this even without even having any notes in there. I'm going to drop the pitch. So that was recorded. Then now when I hit a note here, it dives like that. So that's cool. Now I'm going to put the pitch back to 0. And then now I'm going to save this in 6. And then we're going to try to chain 5 and 6. And you could make this any number of sequences to get sort of a really elaborate low frequency oscillation. And anything that you haven't motion sequenced, you still have control over. So if you wanted more peak, for example. And I can also turn up that. Alright, so you get the idea there that you can use motion sequencing as a way to modulate your parameters even when you don't have an actual sequence going. And now there's a simple fun thing that you can do on the NuBass, which is go into step record mode, put in a simple sequence. Now that sounds like this. But if we go into step jump mode, that basically can become like an arpeggiator. Add a little delay and reverb. Alright, I feel like the Volca NuBass can be pretty intense, but it's also got a lot of nice, sort of sweet, rounder, and more bubbly types of sounds that you can get out of it. I think the sequencing and motion sequencing is quite powerful on it. One thing that we haven't done is synced it up with another Volca, and so I've got the beats here. I'm going to hook that up and close this video out with that. So I appreciate you watching, and I will see you in the next one.